What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the roll up. We have a very special guest, Brayden from Blockpour today. We're going to be talking about data in blockchain and crypto. So sit back, relax. This one should be tons of fun. Brayden, it's great to have you on. Like we were talking about a little bit before we hit record, you've been in crypto some time. Could you give us a sense of what got you into crypto and kind of what has been your journey up until this point?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I obviously heard of crypto, I think in 2016, near the tail end of 2016. Started kind of dabbling in, I guess, beginning of 2017. Started buying a couple tokens. Obviously had the big run up in 2017, as we all know. And after 2017, started taking the space, I guess, a bit more seriously. Noticed that it was kind of picking up steam, lots of opportunity to build, solve problems. So I've just been trying to get as involved as I can. And then 2018 forward, just been building tools, which eventually evolved into what Blockpour is today. But yeah, I've been in the space since about 2017 or so.
Beautiful. Are you a computer scientist by trade, or kind of what were you doing at the time when you discovered crypto?
Yeah, so I've always been doing, I guess, computer science type of stuff. I mean, I've always been a developer, been a hacker at heart, I guess. Just throwing together websites. I used to do website design kind of as a freelancer through university. I actually studied business, not computer science. I was kind of torn between the two. For computer science, I'm kind of self-taught, and wanted to, have, I guess, a different perspective on some stuff. So that was kind of the motivation to go through, I guess, business school. But all through business school, I was still hacking away at stuff, and obviously diving into crypto during that time. So yeah, definitely developer at heart, and enjoy hacking and throwing stuff together as much as I can.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of similarities drawn between like that time, like the 2016, almost like 2016 to 2018 era, and where we are today. Like after the mania of DeFi summer and yield farming, all that, it's kind of quieted down a little bit. And I was having a conversation the other day with, I think it was Bobby from CoinGecko, talking about how like during these times, like we kind of rediscover like the philosophy of crypto and like the ethos. Whereas in the mania, it's just like, well, we're in it to make the money, like everything's going up. This is so great. And then kind of like in these valleys, we kind of rediscover like why we're in it, like bank the unbanked, give people more financial freedom and empower them for more economic freedom. And I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about Blockpour and kind of like, you know, you were dabbling a little bit in crypto, you were learning a little bit in 2017, probably bought some tokens, they did really well. And then it was like, wow, like this space is doing so much for me. Like, what can I do for it? I shared a similar experience and then started to get more into it in 2018 as well. What was your experience kind of in 2018, maybe when prices subsided a little bit and you started to look at like what particularly drew your interest? What were some of those things that captured your interest?
Yeah, I mean, definitely Ethereum. I think just the understanding of applications being built on a blockchain was obviously a new concept around that time. Because I mean, at that time, you had tokens like, 𝗫𝗿𝗫𝗫, Bitcoin. I mean, a lot of these like layer ones. But you start looking at things like Ethereum, I mean, it gets really exciting. You could deploy contracts and do all these things. And near the tail end of 2018, obviously Uniswap had kind of launched, and that was a big revolution for me, anyways, because I enjoyed trading on Binance, Bitfinex, on these different exchanges. But being able to exchange, in a peer-to-peer way that was obviously not requiring a counterparty, just being able to interact with liquidity pools was definitely a huge eye opener into the opportunities that this space can bring on the decentralized side of things. And so, with Uniswap obviously launching in 2020, near the end of 2018, I started kind of building tools to analyze tokens that were trading on Uniswap. And with Uniswap, you can obviously create multiple pools with the same token. And so there's some kind of like arbitrage opportunities, playing around with some of the tokens, being able to buy tokens on Uniswap and sell them on Binance, and just really inefficient arbitrage, I guess, in some senses. And then as that ecosystem kind of grew, as we all know, SushiSwap had obviously, cloned Uniswap and had launched as well. And that's where things really started getting interesting, I think, from my perspective, in the sense that you kind of have this liquidity fragmentation now between these competitors, essentially, right? SushiSwap is fighting for liquidity, Uniswap is fighting for liquidity. Users are kind of torn. Obviously, you have one side, with one project and vice versa. That started creating, inefficient markets, I think, right? Because when you have liquidity being segregated, you have some tokens trading on one DEX and some tokens trading on another. And that's where things like arbitrage started becoming much more interesting and enticing, because you could actually start doing arbitrage on chain instead of having to offload to a Binance. You could just execute a trade on SushiSwap and sell it, on Uniswap. So started getting really involved in that space, building some smart contract bots and just trying to get as deep as I could into that space and understanding it. And obviously building tools, being involved in telegrams and trying to start sharing data. And this is eventually obviously how Blockpour had formed, was out of that. But this problem has obviously been amplified exponentially. I mean, we have so many DEXs. There's probably over 100 DEXs just on Ethereum. And now you have all these different layer 1 and layer 2s that are EVM compatible. And so now you have the complications of bridges. You have DEXs everywhere. You have liquidity everywhere. And I think right now we're in an interesting time where data and liquidity is extremely fragmented and siloed. And that's one of the problems that Blockpour is obviously trying to solve, is bringing kind of that fragmentation of data into one source or into one feed. But obviously, over time, hopefully this becomes a bit more efficient. There's obviously liquidity aggregators that exist that kind of help some of these problems. But I guess that's kind of like the introduction for me. Getting involved into the actual on-chain side of things was through that.
Yeah. And we hear a lot about like liquidity fragmentation, but not so much about data fragmentation. And those two obviously go hand in hand. Like you mentioned how there was some more arbitrage opportunities that came up from the rise of decentralized exchanges. You didn't have to like way back when there was that arbitrage trade that I think Arthur Hayes and SBF both just whacked, and they did really well by like flying to Japan or flying to Korea and bringing a bag of cash and buying Bitcoin in America and then selling it in Korea or on those Asian exchanges, and they were able to arbitrage the heck out of those centralized exchanges and make like giga money. And then all of a sudden that trade kind of opened up to everyone on chain, because you didn't have to fly somewhere and carry a bunch of cash with you. You could just take it from Uniswap to your Coinbase or like whichever exchange you went to, and then even it became more and more permissionless. And I think that's kind of the trend that we're seeing, because once more exchanges started to pop up and more networks started to pop up, you didn't need any centralized exchange account. You didn't have to arbitrage between Coinbase and Uniswap. You could go between Uniswap and PancakeSwap, and you could just manage the bridges yourself rather than taking the flight and going that way. And I've seen tons of research and just evidence that liquidity is fragmented across a whole bunch of these exchanges and a lot of these networks. And I've seen it's kind of bittersweet, because you do get these arbitrage opportunities, but it is maybe a less efficient market in some ways. Could you paint more of the picture like of the data fragmentation? Kind of like, why is that good? Why is that bad? And then your general opinions on like how we see the trend in data either getting more fragmented or more unified.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a couple different ways to answer. I mean, the first thing is just looking back at arbitrage. I mean, I think there's both good things and bad things with this permissionless kind of architecture, or I guess, way that we're headed with these on-chain activities. I mean, you probably heard of, MEV and some like the bad side of things when it comes to people trying to interact with these DEXs. But with arbitrage, I mean, I think it's actually net positive just having more efficient markets. There's a lot of contracts out there now that exist that kind of automate this process to obviously make money themselves, but I think it inherently kind of creates this kind of price parity at the same time, which is obviously good for the overall market if you have prices, closely aligned on these different exchanges. I think when it comes to like overall data fragmentation, just outside of just liquidity fragmentation, it's kind of a similar problem. Like you have all these networks, you have all these layer 1s, all these layer 2s, and somebody new to crypto, or even an institution or anybody who's trying to enter the space, I think it's very overwhelming, right? If you try to tell somebody like, get MetaMask, oh, now you have to bridge, now you have to use PancakeSwap, come back. Like I think the UI and UX is notoriously bad in crypto for reasons like that. And I think when it comes to like data fragmentation as well, it's you have all this activity happening on all these networks. You have transactions, transfers, people interacting. But if you run a node on Avalanche or on Phantom, you obviously can't access data on Ethereum, right? Because these blockchains run, independently, for the most part. And so with Blockpour, we're running nodes on all these different networks that we support. And we're basically trying to pull all this data into one place. So if you're a user who wants to understand what a wallet is doing, we could obviously give you a cross-chain perspective instead of having data fragmented across all these different networks and looking at different providers, right? If I wanted to analyze somebody's wallet on Ethereum, there are steps to do that, either running an Ethereum node or going through a data provider, but now you're missing what that wallet is doing in other spots or other places. And so that's kind of like the data fragmentation, I guess, that I was kind of talking about, is just being able to pull all these things into one place and get the overall picture of actually what's going on, not just on a per wallet level, but also, contract interactions, and where activity is kind of happening. Yeah, that's kind of what we're aiming to hopefully maybe not solve, but definitely make it a bit more efficient.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting to hear you guys are running all these nodes, because there's obviously other data providers out there, like,
Yep.
without even getting into some of them, I'm curious, do most of those, you're more familiar with kind of like their solution than I am. Do most of those other data providers also run nodes?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, early on, you have a couple options, right? If you want to be a data provider or access raw data yourself, you could obviously go through an RPC provider, right? Like an Infura, a QuickNode, an Alchemy. I mean, there's a lot of these solutions that kind of exist. And there's nothing wrong with them. The problem is, at scale, you're dependent on this third party to access a node, right? So for Alchemy, you're paying per RPC request to a node, which is fine if you're just a developer, if you're trying to build a platform, but it could become extremely expensive if you're making, billions of requests a day across all these networks. And if you're trying to extract a lot of events, it doesn't become feasible for several reasons. And you're also dependent on somebody else's architecture, and infrastructure rather. For us early on, we decided that it made sense to run our own infrastructure just for the sake that we would have unrestricted access to this data. So if we wanted to start supporting NFTs or GameFi and we had to backfill all the blocks and look through them all, we could do that pretty quickly with our infrastructure. Whereas with a QuickNode or an Alchemy, we're now dependent on their rate limits, but also it would be extremely expensive to iterate over all those blocks again to look for different events. And so it was kind of like I guess like an engineering investment early on for us to decide, up front, it's obviously easier to go with a third-party provider, but we decided to go the route of running our own infrastructure, which is slowly starting to pay off now, which, takes some time, but hopefully we'll be able to reap the benefits, that we've created over the next few years.
Yeah, yeah. The RPC providers have kind of, it's almost like the one centralized choke point I think we haven't really solved yet. Most users are not running their own node. Like this was, something common back in, I mean, even before my time, like when CPU mining was still relatively not common, but maybe possible in Bitcoin. Like we never really got that point with Ethereum. And I think we have enough trouble with self-custody that like everyone running their own node is just kind of a pipe dream at this point. We may get there, but I think we kind of have to solve the self-custody UX first, and then we may get to a place where we can get people running their own node.
Yeah, and I mean, going back to that as well, like it's if you look at Ethereum, for example, if you go to ethereum.org, if you want to run an archive node, first of all, you need like decent compute, like you need obviously, dedicated resources, you need a lot of storage, but it also takes like 30 plus days just to sync, right? So there's like an actual like a blocker. Like it's not just like you need to pay money, you need storage, like you need to actually wait if you want to run an archive node. And I can't even imagine like BNB chain or BSC. I mean, that network is like 20 plus terabytes. Like if you're trying to run a cloud node, archive node with that type of storage, I mean, you're going to be paying, thousands of dollars a month just in storage, let alone the time it will take to sync. But with that being said, I mean, there's solutions like Aragon out there that are kind of implementations of Geth, or different implementation of Geth that allows you to obviously sync nodes extremely fast and at much more efficient storage sizes. So there are definitely ways to go around running these archive nodes if you do want like unrestricted access to some of this data. But some of the stuff is still kind of in, I guess, early stages. So definitely excited on that front to see how those types of platforms and projects evolve as well.
I first set up my my first Ethereum wallet. I had to download like the entire chain. and
Yeah.
it took like 3 days to sync, which obviously is going to take so much more time now with all the transactions. But yeah, it's just crazy to see like it's so insane. Like we've came such a long way in terms of UX, where you don't need to spend all these resources or spend all this storage to have a wallet. Like now you can just have a wallet in your Google Chrome browser. Like there's one side of like anyone who's new is going to think that's bloatware. Like a Google Chrome extension, like I don't want a Google Chrome extension. I just want to like click a couple buttons or something. But coming from like the era of like downloading the entire chain, and like that, you have to do that to own a wallet and own some tokens. We've made tremendous progress up until this point that we're gonna figure out these UX things. It's gonna take a little bit of time, but like with all the community feedback and now like all of the developers and all the builders who are contributing to the UX, like I'm sure we'll figure it out. And
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, it's definitely a good point. Kind of like you said earlier, like if it's really a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, with that enhancement in UI UX, obviously now these people are dependent on third-party RPCs or on an RPC provider, right? I mean, I personally don't think it's a big problem, but it's definitely kind of a bit of a trade-off of decentralization, I guess. From before, if you're running your own node, you're obviously, you're in control of that and you're in control of your own RPC, whereas now we're a bit dependent on a lot of these providers, which I think is fine, but it's just one of those trade-offs, I guess, with better UX, especially when it comes to the decentralized side of things.
yeah, the other one is Pocket, right? Pocket
Yeah,
Network is another one of those
yeah,
decentralized RPCs. Yeah, just haven't seen really a need for them, and like I don't know. I think part of the mindset is that it's a little bit reactive. Like, we aren't really in a position to change like our normal RPC provider until there's a problem with the one that, we've been using. And then that's unfortunately sometimes when it's too late. But if we can kind of preventatively and preemptively kind of go and change these RPCs and make some decentralized tweaks to kind of prevent like any exploits from happening to begin with, then hopefully, we can save some exploits, we can save some money and save some people from theft. What are you guys doing on Blockpour to kind of like, like just further the entire ecosystem towards like this more unified data solution? Like, you know, at, how you see this future shaking out with like the progress that we've been making on UX so far. How do you see someone using Blockpour?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple interesting ways to use Blockpour. I mean, like I said before, I mean, I started Blockpour kind of out of my excitement of DEXs and trading DEXs. So a lot of our current data is obviously around decentralized exchanges. I mean, I think one really quick example is just trying to make not really the space, but I guess certain aspects of the safe a little bit safer for people who are new to crypto. And one example of this is, if you're trading on PancakeSwap or Uniswap, you might look at a liquidity pool that has, $30 million of liquidity and make the assumption that, oh, this pool is safe to trade in, right? There's guaranteed liquidity there. But if that liquidity is provided by one provider, they could obviously pull that out like in one transaction, right? And so I think for Blockpour, we're trying to add more data and deeper analytics to a lot of these things that don't currently exist. I mean, if you go to like the Uniswap analytics dashboard, they obviously show you a lot of stuff. For us, we want to get a bit deeper and obviously aggregate a bunch of stuff together. So you could see, if you're looking at a token, you'd be able to see liquidity from all these sources, but also be able to deep dive into, how safe that liquidity actually is or how predictive that liquidity actually is. And when it comes to like just overall data, I think for us, we're working on, a bunch of APIs for developers and also on the B2B side of our business where you'd be able to access multi-chain data inherently. So if you wanted to look up the token like 𝗷𝗵, get price information or liquidity information, you'd be able to get that cross-chain. So if you typed in 𝗷𝗵, you'd be able to see the price on Phantom, price on Avalanche, and just try to combine all these things into one easy to access set of APIs. And then we obviously plan to extend our front end over time as well for the retail side of things, for people to access this data in an easy way.
Yeah. Yeah. The notion that like everything that can get tokenized will get tokenized kind of provides this like really fragmented view when we have so many tokens. We're even seeing like the political currencies, like the ones that are domestically tied to countries, start to become more and more fragmented. Like as of recently, more nations are declaring that they're not going to kind of adhere to dollar homogeny that, we've seen like over the last, bunch of years. And it's almost taking like the shitcoin thesis to the next level, like by pioneering it in blockchain and cryptocurrencies. Nations are starting to adopt that same viewpoint and take more of their own economy into the hands of the currency holders, and in their citizens. So that's creating like this more and more fragmented world, and Blockpour is there to kind of like unify the data and give more relative, like the deeper analytics you mentioned, to me give more of like a relative value, where we're no longer just equating everything in dollar terms. And that was something that had almost, it wasn't really around like early on. And then once more of the centralized exchanges started to get volume, and trading view got integrated into these exchanges, everything was denominated in the dollar. But I think we've gone through ebbs and flows where like stuff is, and then it isn't really denominated in the dollar. And as we kind of see the progression of like the domestic currencies move more and more towards like a fragmented relative view, not all tied and denominated in the dollar, it seems like that's where the trend is going. And it'll create more and more arbitrage between like not only the fiat currencies, but also the cryptocurrencies, when the rails are built to kind of take advantage and arbitrage those markets.
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, going back to the dollar, I mean, it's kind of interesting if you kind of look at the space at a high level that we're in right now, and kind of like the early stage of it. I mean, I've always considered, USDC as a relatively safe stable coin, in comparison to some of the others out there. And I mean, that obviously had a pretty major depeg. So they're obviously, I think that kind of shows the immaturity kind of in the space. Obviously, that was kind of, caused by external factors and this and that, and ended up repegging quickly. But it's things like that kind of, show, I guess, some of, how early we are in this space, I think. And yeah, it was just interesting seeing that play out. I never would have thought we would see a depeg at that scale, with a stablecoin as large as USDC.
Yeah, and talk about an arbitrage opportunity right there. I mean, anyone who was able to still redeem 1-to-1, I mean, that USDC was at such a bargain at like 89 or 91 cents or whatever it got to.
Yeah, it was just funny seeing like the liquidation bots on Twitter, people getting liquidated trying to buy and sell a stable coin. You don't see that often. You see a lot of liquidations for Bitcoin and Ethereum, but seeing people share liquidation alerts for people getting liquidated trying to long a stable coin is definitely not a sight that you see often.
Yeah, yeah. And it's not. And like from what I've seen about those liquidation bots, on chain especially, like they all happen at once. It's like these cataclysmic events, where something happens to like shake the entire industry, and that's when having one of these liquidator bots is like particularly profitable, because there's so many liquidations that happen at once. They may be unprofitable for a month or two, but if you can catch one of these events and have one of those liquidators on, that's when it really ramps up. That's when the liquidations happen, and like those bots are able to capture tons of profit. And I imagine kind of streaming some data in from Blockpour via those APIs gives developers a sense of where to deploy those types of bots.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we're obviously working on extending some more functionality out, but for USDC as an example, I mean, during the depegging, something interesting that you could do is you could just use our APIs or our front end to kind of see the price of USDC across all these networks. When big events like this happen, like when big liquidation events or big price movements happen, that's where the biggest price efficiencies obviously occur. Because on some networks you have liquidations, on other networks you don't, especially when it's on-chain liquidations. So there's massive pricing inefficiencies that occur during these times of panic. And with Blockpour, I mean, you could obviously utilize that to kind of see the current price of these assets on these different chains. There's a lot of smart contracts that will try to resolve this and obviously profit. But there is still lots of opportunity out there, especially when there's big swings in the market and a lot of panic happening.
Yeah, and that's definitely an opportune time to use a liquidator bot. What are you seeing on the MEV side, if any? What's your experience with that, and like how does Blockpour data fit into some MEV?
Yeah, I mean, MEV is interesting. I find, the stuff that Flashbots is doing is super fascinating as well for MEV protection and a lot of the other stuff that they're working on. I mean, MEV is, I mean, for Blockpour, we haven't started capturing it yet. I mean, we are capturing it internally, but we're not showing it on our APIs or dashboard yet. We're still trying to better understand MEV itself, but we definitely want to start labeling pools that are often MEV attacked, and also encourage people, obviously, to use RPC relayers that will provide MEV protection. I think MEV has become a big enough topic at this point that a lot of people are at least aware of it, which is the first step, I guess, which is good. And people can obviously protect themselves if they want. I know that some aggregators, I don't know if 1inch does, but I know a couple of aggregators already have kind of, MEV protection built in as like a feature or functionality, which I think is super good. But obviously MEV is everywhere. I mean, you've probably seen some transactions being shared on Twitter of some of these massive bots, moving funds. And some of the bots actually will often get wrecked as well themselves, from other bots. So definitely, a bit of the Wild West or the dark forest, as Flashbots, has alluded to. So it's yeah, it's definitely an interesting space.
Yeah, yeah. It speaks to like just how early we still are, and it's kind of insane to think about. Like, this space is almost, well, Bitcoin's more than 10 years old. Ethereum is getting up there as well. But in the grand scheme of things, like we're still so early.
Yeah, and I mean, outside of MEV, there's some other fascinating, things as well. I think on the DeFi side, like flash loans, I think are also another very interesting concept that a lot of people want to have more insight into what's actually happening. I mean, on Twitter, like these massive transaction logs will be shared of, a flash bot, execution that has either exploited, a chain or a protocol. And it's kind of interesting because with flashbots, obviously people are trying to do arbitrage by taking out like an uncollateralized loan. I just find that whole concept super fascinating. I was doing I've been involved in a few hackathons in the past in crypto, and in 2019 I did a San Francisco blockchain hackathon with a couple other folks, and we were actually working on flash loans or building a flash loan POC for riskless arbitrage when it was still on testnet. So it's been interesting to see that evolve as well. That's kind of obviously different than MEV, but just the ability to be able to take out these massive uncollateralized loans if you pay it back in the same transaction, and kind of some of the, I guess, things and opportunities that opens up for people, whether that's through exploits or, or other types of actions.
Yeah. What do you guys see as the main consumer of Blockpour data? Like, is it mostly institutional or retail? Because I think there's such a learning curve in crypto that like it takes still like a computer scientist to really develop a type of solution um for a liquidator bot or a flash loan. Like that hasn't broken into like TradFi types of businesses quite yet. But I imagine it will at some point. Like they have robust product development and engineering departments within their companies and banks. Like, but by the time they break into it, there's going to be some like new way to play the game. So like I'm curious how you've seen kind of like Blockpour been how has Blockpour been received by some of the different audiences? Who do you see as the main consumer?
Yes, I mean we kind of have two, I guess targets for Blockpour. Like on the business side, we obviously have the B2C offering and the B2B offering. On the B2C side, it's our retail, front end platform that you could access and use. That's used by a lot of traders, whether they're experienced or non-experienced, just trying to get information about a token or trying to deep dive into liquidity pools. So our front end platform is definitely tailored towards the B2C side. I mean, we want to start getting into adding additional functionality where you can kind of unlock things with subscriptions and kind of dive super deep into some of these different segments with alerts, and kind of other functionality like that. On the B2B side, like you had kind of alluded to, obviously on the B2B side, it's a lot of our raw API access is what, a lot of these institutions or companies want to ingest to build their own types of dashboards or front ends with the data. I mean, our front end is just our representation of our APIs, but you could obviously build anything you wanted with the raw data itself. Some of the interesting use cases that we've seen early on are around reconciliation. So if you're an institution, if you're a trader, if you're a hedge fund, whatever it might be, being able to track your own wallets or your clients' wallets on chain and seeing where they're moving funds, seeing who they're interacting with, seeing portfolios over time and kind of fund movements, I think is something that our APIs provide right now. We also have a tool on the front end as well where we can kind of visualize, token flows between entities or between wallets to kind of see how these, wallets like Binance or a wallet, that you might label yourself is getting funds or sending funds to.
Yeah, I saw the token, the transfer flows page on there, and it's cool. Like it gives a visual representation of like what's going on this chain. And as we grow, like the number of chains and like all these bridges in and out, we're like populating this tokenized world. Like I can totally see how like there's a city, Ethereum, and then there's all these bridges that go out, and like these chains are interconnected, almost like you can see the traffic. If you were like a traffic controller, you could see, cars and flights moving on like a flight tracker, like in and out of Manhattan. You can see transactions moving in and out of Ethereum on this type of transfer flow visualization that's there on Blockpour. It's super cool to see like that evolve, and how it started out is just this like not much going on, just kind of like rock in the sea, and now it's got like all this life on it, which is it's just amazing to see the progression of it, and to think about how early we still are, and the progression that's still to come in terms of UX. Like we see forks once in a while, Uniswap, and then we saw sushi swap, pancake swap, but once in a while we see a spoon, and how like that normally changes the game. For now, like I think we're kind of on the precipice of like really embracing the merge economics that I think people are calling it, and with ETH being deflationary, we got another halving coming up in a year or so. There's some really exciting advancements that are coming up, and we may see another spin of the flywheel and another thrust of momentum here relatively soon.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully that would definitely be nice. And I mean, going back to your city analogy, yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely some interesting stuff, in the works. I mean, if you look at some of the stuff that Layer Zero is doing, and some of these other platforms, I mean, Stargate as well, with this cross-chain messaging and cross-chain liquidity. I think it's definitely kind of trying to connect these cities, with your analogy, and just allow the user to interact with liquidity, interact with platforms without needing to have this high level of technical experience, or have to go through all these headaches of bridging and unbridging. Like Stargate can handle these things kind of behind the scenes. So definitely super, super exciting.
Yeah, the cross-chain stuff is super exciting. Like we recently rebranded to the Rollup just to really embrace like the scalability of it. And we could have a whole other conversation on how these cross-chain messaging protocols could really level up the game for financial applications and other applications as well. I think it'd be really cool to see some of the data solutions, like they're obviously they're all token based, but that's because like right now probably more than 90% of the applications on chain are financial, but we're seeing more and more governance. We're seeing more and more social, like Lens protocol is popping off. So yeah, do you have any plans to incorporate maybe some of the non-financial data into Blockpour?
Yeah, I definitely want to get into other data sets as well. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, with us running, archive nodes on these networks, we obviously have access to any type of data that we want to extract. I think when it comes to like GameFi NFTs, I mean, those are some other exciting sectors, I think, as well, just showing some data points for, but also other things as well. So definitely want to start adding that stuff as well to our platform and to our APIs.
Yeah, and like you said, you're positioned to like really take advantage of that because you're running the nodes yourself. You made the engineering investment to kind of go really deep from the onset, and there's so many possibilities that unfold as a result of solid infrastructure. Yeah, super exciting to see what you guys are doing.
Yeah, and I mean, I think like you said earlier, I mean, like these during bull markets, even bear markets, I mean, you see like these exciting advancements every, once in a while, like this new big thing. Like NFTs have obviously been around for years, but they recently popped off. And so I think one thing as well with Blockpour being a startup and us running our own nodes, if there are trends that appear, and if there are these new platforms or these new concepts that emerge, hopefully we can quickly start capturing that data and obviously providing something valuable on our front end right away. So definitely, we're trying to anticipate trends and trying to keep up with all these different ecosystem advancements, which is becoming incredibly difficult because there's something new happening every day in the space. But definitely super excited, to see what comes next, and also, to to quickly add it to our platform so users can understand what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, right now you guys are doing a great job providing those tools and the visualization and the data in general to these, consumers of all kinds of apps on chain. So kudos. Where can our audience find you? Obviously it's blockpour.com. So, you guys can check out the application. You can find out kind of all the data solutions that we've been talking about, and where can our audience find you, personally on Twitter, or connect on Discord?
Yeah, so on Twitter, it's just at Blockpour, and then obviously our app.blockpour.com. We are looking at opening up a Telegram and or a Discord as well. So once we do, it will be on our landing page, and users can hopefully connect with us there. But yeah, any questions, or if you want to reach out, just feel free to send us a message on Twitter, and we could definitely get back to you. Yeah.
Awesome. Brayden, it was a pleasure. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you.